me, I need to start doing that now. And if you would like to chat, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to share those in the chat as we go along. And the best thing to do is to select all panelists and attendees before you enter your message or your question so that we're all in one conversation and can see what you have to share and what you're asking. Each of you should have received a whiteboard paddle and marker in the mail. And if you find something inspiring, exciting, or new, write a quick adjective or message on that paddle at the end of the session, and that will be another fun way for us to engage when we have our videos on. All right, let me make sure I've got everybody coming into this session. And I think we are ready to go. Again, if you're just joining us, please do mute your lines and turn off your videos while the presenters are doing their piece. All right. Just a couple more folks. Please go ahead and mute your lines and turn off your videos if you're not presenting. Okay. Erica, I think we are ready.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Today, this hour will be spent on local housing resources and development. We have 3 panelists here to share what their organizations are doing. So as housing challenges rise across Montana, local municipalities are working to pull together resources and build support to meet these local housing needs. A number of communities in Montana have already or are in the process of establishing local housing trust funds. The panelists today are from Helena, Missoula, and Big Sky, and they're going to share with you how their communities are creating funds, what the role and the funding sources are, and what the priorities they are hoping to address with these resources are. So with that, I'd like each of our panelists to just give a brief introduction of themselves and their group, and then we'll circle back and they can tell us what their group is up to and how they are working in their communities. As a brief introduction of myself, my name is Erica Werdala, and I work for the Northwest Montana Association of Realtors, and I'm their public affairs director. So I am the face of the Northwest Montana Association up here and speak for the realtor profession on their behalf. So I'm so glad you're here today. This is a hot topic, especially here in Northwest Montana, but I know it's a big concern across the state, and I'm so curious to hear what these panelists have in the works for their communities. So Emily, can you tell us who you are and what you're up to?
I am Emily Harris-Shears. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Administrator with the City of Missoula. I work on implementing the trust fund as well as the city's broader housing policy.
Great. Thank you. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Seifang. I'm the Executive Director of the Big Sky Community Housing Trust and working to try to fix the problem in our fast-growing resort community.
Okay, great. Glad you could join us. And Sharon?
Good morning. My name is Sharon Haug, and I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Helena. And under the Community Development Department, we have building planning, and we just recently hired a new housing coordinator. And our office is in charge of implementing the city's housing policy and amongst other land use and community development issues.
Great, great, thanks. I'm so glad you're all here. So Emily, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you've got cooking down in Missoula. I know you're just kind of getting started, and what that process looks like and how that's working.
Sure. So the City of Missoula adopted a citywide housing policy known as A Place to Call Home in 2019, which outlines several strategies that you can see on the screen to address our ranging housing needs. And the strategies are organized in 4 recommendations, which are to track and analyze progress for continuous improvement, align and leverage existing funding resources to support housing, reduce barriers, and promote access to affordable homes and partner to create and preserve affordable homes. And the creation of the affordable, oh, Laura, can I go back?
Sure.
Thank you. The creation of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is a named strategy in the housing policy under align and leverage existing funding resources to support housing, and a foundational component of supporting much of the rest of the policy recommendations. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was adopted by ordinance in July of 2020. And the ordinance outlines key foundational pieces, including the establishment of a 12-member oversight body made up of 3 ex officio or set members, including the mayor, the city council president, and the executive director of the Missoula Housing Authority or their designees, and 9 appointed members with a broad range of knowledge bases, including expertise navigating housing systems, banking and finance, housing nonprofits, housing or real estate, and community members. The ordinance also outlines sources of revenue, including annual general fund investment, proceeds of sales of city-owned land that are not otherwise designated for other purposes, private donations, contribution, bequests, grants, and loans, and then principal and interest payments made by borrowers to the city for outstanding trust fund loans. And then finally, the ordinance also outlines what we can use the trust fund for, what we can spend and grant and loan money on. And that's an extensive list that I'm not going to go over right now. But I did upload the ordinance and the resolution into the conference list. I don't know, the session information. So you can find all the information there. You know, gives us a really great foundation to sort of build our trust fund from, is our ordinance and our resolution. Laura, now I'm ready for the second slide. Thank you. And then the resolution that accompanies the ordinance outlines our 5-year strategy to capitalize the trust fund at a level of $10 million within our first 5 years of adoption. And City Council seeded our trust fund with a $750,000 general fund investment during the adoption last summer. We're expecting the proceeds from a city-owned parcel of land this summer that will bring our trust fund balance to about $2.4 million. And then we'll begin to grant and loan by unified application in the winter of 2022. And I just want to mention, I listed leverage opportunities, which are our tax increment financing, CDBG, and home dollars. And we call those, and we think of those fund sources as leverage. But it's important just to call it out in our community that those are directly funding millions of dollars of development right now. And those are sources, they're not fully a part of our funding package. They won't be a part of grants and loans directly from the trust fund, but they're in alignment with the values of our trust fund and further the work and goals of our full housing policy. So we consider them in our community a part of our full leverage opportunities. I'm ready for my next slide, please, Laura. Thanks. And then I wanted to just outline what we've been working on for the last several months since the ordinance was adopted. So our primary focus has been building a strong foundation for the trust fund to operate from, and that's included setting up the Affordable Housing Oversight Committee. And the Oversight Committee is tasked with approving the fund's administrative policies and the annual allocation plan, and really, you know, helping set some of the priorities for the trust fund. Public process and intentional engagement has been at the forefront of our planning throughout this work. And a community value that we hold and heard through the public comment process of establishing the trust fund was the importance of representation. So we designed the recruitment process for the oversight committee to reach a broad range of Missoulians, to reflect a diversity of people in race, housing experiences, economic background, and expertise. And some of our approaches have slowed down our process. And I think sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it's good to slow down a process if it means that more people are engaged and more voices are at the table or in the room. And like recruiting, some of what slowed down our process was recruiting for a public application work group to help us create the application and interview materials, and committing to offering all 44 applicants who applied to be a part of the oversight committee an interview. And the payoff of having community input and perspective throughout our process has been well worth it. We've used opportunities to engage the community and provide updates throughout this first year of implementation, from community meetings, the community recruitment process, and seeking public comment on the draft administration policies that opened actually today on our Engage Missoula platform. We remain centered in knowing that community engagement strengthens the foundation that we're building from. So looking ahead, we will continue to engage the community as we focus on convening and supporting the newly established oversight committee that was officially confirmed last night at council. That was a long process we're really excited about. Build our trust fund revenue with sustained and varied sources, and continue to move forward with incentivizing affordable development with the tools and levers within our reach, and strengthening to build partnerships in our community. So hopefully that's a helpful bite-sized overview of what we've been up to.
Well, that sounds great. It sounds like you guys are off to a really good, thoughtful start. And I'm excited to see how this all evolves here in the near future. Good to hear that news from your city council last night. Terrific. All right, so Laura, can you tell us what's going on in your neck of the woods down there in Big Sky?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I don't feel like we're nearly as organized as Missoula at this point, so great job, Emily. Big Sky is an unincorporated area. We are a resort community that really doesn't have a town or any form of city government. So things here get done a little bit differently. Big Sky Community Housing Trust is a nonprofit organization that was formed first under the umbrella of HRDC and has since spun off to become its own agency. And really, we just sort of put ourselves as the people in charge of helping with our big workforce housing problem because we didn't have a city government that was working with the issue and really trying to move the needle ahead in a way. So we have a couple of very big employers in town who have been trying to deal with the housing needs of their seasonal workers. They tend to take one approach, which is to build a lot of dorm style type housing for their folks, or buy up hotels in the area, or even master lease some of the condos that are out there. And we've come to an agreement since the nonprofit was formed that will let the resort take care of their seasonal people, and the housing trust will really focus on the people who are trying to make Big Sky their home for the long term. So people who are not just here for 6 months, but really want to stay here. So as the organization has formed, we've taken on a number of tasks. First of all, we have been able with HRDC to build 52 deed restricted condominiums that became home ownership opportunities for folks that are selling for about 40% below market rate right now. They're deed restricted so that they can never be flipped into market rate housing. But our next project that we're focusing on is to try to build rental units for folks because not everybody is ready to purchase yet. We still have people who want to live here full time, but are still in the rental market. So we're in the process of having our next development project approved for that. We also are working to try to convince the we have over 1,000 short-term vacation rentals in our market right now. And we're trying to convince a number of those owners to consider getting out of the short-term vacation market and rent to locals long-term instead. Now it's a tough sell because they can make a ton of money on the vacation rental market. So we're trying some very creative and innovative ways to motivate people to rent to their local workforce. And then we also use our funds to provide down payment assistance for those folks who are buying, particularly our subsidized ownership opportunities. So as we looked at how to fund our initiatives, the challenge was that, again, that we're unincorporated, can't really tap into city monies. So we looked around at how other successful resort mountain communities were funding their housing challenges. And we looked at quite a number of them to try to learn from them. And what we do see is a lot of people have some opportunities that aren't available to us in Montana. Some of the taxes that are able to be implemented are not things that are available to us, partly because we're in Montana, partly because we're unincorporated. But what we've been having a lot of community conversation is that, well, we got to have a strategy for how we're going to fund this that fits our particular circumstances. So Big Sky has come up with a potential funding scenario. We are blessed as one of the Montana communities that has access to resort tax. We're a resort tax district, so that all of the luxury items, which includes hotel and lodging for visitors, as well as a lot of visitor purchases that are here, go into this fund that gets allocated every year to the different nonprofits who basically, as well as some of the government entities like the fire and sheriff services that manage our resort community. So we have been blessed to be able to receive from resort tax about $1.5 million per year. That's kind of an average of funds that are going into our workforce housing initiatives. We're also, we're not able to charge a real estate transfer tax in Montana, but we're working on a program that tries to, we're having an incredible amount of real estate change hands here. Really for the last 5 years, but the last 18 months has been astronomical. And if we just were able to tap into like 0.25% of that transaction, we would fund our workforce housing scenario. So we're working to try to convince people to add us into that sales process and make a donation into this housing fund. We also have several strong foundations from some of the pretty nice resort clubs that are in the area. Each have their own community foundation that we've been able to get significant support from. And then we're tapping just into general philanthropy of the community. So our model probably doesn't fit a lot of cities, but it works for our particular area. And I think that's the point I would bring across, is that every community has to just look at what tools they have available and what's unique about their circumstance and come up with a strategy that actually fits your area in order to be successful in implementing the initiatives that you've outlined.
Excellent. I see a lot of similarities between the situation there in Big Sky as it is in Whitefish. A little bit different economies of scale, but very, very similar scenarios. So thanks for that, Laura. I appreciate it. Okay, so Sharon's up from the city of Helena.
Well, good morning. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to the Housing Trust Fund. The city of Helena is about a year, I'd say, behind Missoula. And if you hear a lot of similarities, we did copy a lot from Missoula because we thought it was a great model. But one of the things we did before we went, I'll step back a couple of steps, we did a housing needs assessment. And I think Emily talked about Missoula's and we talked about Helena's. And so some of our key findings that we were finding with housing was that housing demand is outpacing supply. I don't think any of these are unique to any of you. Affordability gap, our housing prices are climbing like every place else, fortunately. We aren't as bad as Bozeman or Missoula, but for us, median housing price is about $325,000, which is actually a pretty expensive home if you're looking at our median household income. We have a lot of needs with the aging population and special needs population that still need to be met. We would like to encourage more housing choices. We have to look at our land development issues and our regulatory, see if we can establish any regulatory incentives to offset building costs. And we have to always bear in mind the condition of our existing housing stock and look at affordable housing preservation. Many of our long-term multifamily is terming out, is a term of affordable housing, and we have to work with all our nonprofit partners to make sure that we still have those affordable units. And lastly, the computing capacity and funding. We need to monitor progress. So when we establish our housing needs assessment, our commission asks us to show how we are progressing towards these goals and how to educate the public on some of these housing issues. Next slide, please. The goals that we established as a city commission was that all residents should have the opportunity to obtain safe, sanitary, and affordable housing. We need to preserve and expand the supply of housing for all residents, and we need to build the organization capacity within the community to address housing needs. So next slide, please. The city of Helena, based on those goals, have done a few things. And one of the important things I left off of this, the city of Helena just recently hired a housing coordinator. This is the first for the city. We've got several initiatives that she's going to be working on. Her name is Kara Snyder, and I know that all of you will be supporting her in all her efforts. So some of the things that we have done leading up to the Housing Trust Fund is that we did some changes in our land use regulations. I might say that the city of Helena has allowed mother or accessory dwelling units in their zoning ordinance for quite a while. I think ever since 2008, actually, and when we did our major update. But to date, we haven't seen a lot of infill development or use of that. So part of that is going to be one of our educational tools. In addition to that, we've increased lot coverage. We increased our maximum building height. We increased the height of our B2 district to 60 feet. And we used to have a lot area requirement for multifamily. These are some of the things that we were hearing from not only our nonprofit partners, but also our housing developers that were keeping barriers for building more affordable housing or increasing the density. Lewis and Clark County and the city of Helena are probably similar to some of your jurisdictions. We were seeing a lot more building out in the county than we are in the city. And one of our goals is to review all our regulatory barriers or all our issues to kind of continue to look at those review processes. So that leads us to our next one. So we constantly are looking at our building department process, our public works, and also our zoning processes to find out how we can better facilitate affordable housing, how we can make the process easier. Time for a builder is money. So we're trying to find a way that we still can make sure we get insurance, that people are getting safe and affordable housing, but yet things are getting done in a timely manner. So we put quite a bit of effort. And then the other thing the city commission did last year was provide for a waiver or partial waiver of building fees for affordable housing projects. So how this works is that if you are providing housing for 60% or lower median household income, you can petition our city commission to get a full or a partial waiver of your building fees. A good example, or the first one that we've done, we worked with Rocky Mountain Development Council. They did a Red Alder project. It had 80 plus units. As a result, they petitioned the city commission for the waiver of building fees and also our system development fees, which is essentially our hookup fees. And the total bill for both those fees was close to $200,000. So the commission did grant them a full waiver, and that allowed that project to cover some other expenses, but also indicated the commission's commitment to affordable housing. Then lastly, we created our housing trust fund by resolution. Our city commission chose not to also adopt an ordinance like Missoula. So in that resolution, we talk about the sale of city property, similar to what Emily did. We did have the sale of a piece of property downtown. Unfortunately, city of Helena property isn't worth as much as Missoula apparently, because we got about $280,000 off the sale of that first property. In the resolution, it calls that the city manager should put in $100,000 each year into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That doesn't sound a lot, but that was the floor of what our commission felt that they can commit at any given time, given the circumstances. Our commission has chosen, with some of their COVID savings, to add $1 million to that Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And lastly, what they would like is that about 10% of the TIF funds to be used for housing projects in that district. So similar to Missoula, it's more like a support mechanism. But we now have just started, we've got 3 TIF districts. So we don't have as long a history as some other communities in Montana, but we do have high potential. Purposely put the Housing Authority, Stewart Homes, if you're familiar, in our last TIF district, which is covering the old Capitol Hill Mall in that general area. We have one downtown. We have one in our 6th ward or midtown areas. All 3 of those areas are locations where affordable housing is a good opportunity. So right now, that's how we're going to fund it. We are in the process of putting together our admin manual. We've got Kara working on that, and we've also hired a consultant to assist us in helping draft that manual. And we're also going to begin the process of naming our Affordable Housing Trust Fund board or review board. We don't want to finish our review manual until that board's been seated, so they can have and provide input into that process. On Thursday, at the request of one of our commissions, and we're always doing public outreach, we're using things like Be Heard, that's a program to kind of reach out to the public. What we are doing is that we've invited all our housing partners and community members in our Helena Citizen Council to a meeting on Thursday to kind of talk about what they see as priorities for housing, and also to kind of help us better identify some, as we say in the business, shovel ready, or projects that are ready to move forward. So the focus can be on those projects that we can move forward using a combination of trust fund money and also potential COVID money that the city will be receiving. So with that, we're looking forward to a lot more activity and a lot more resources from the city of Helena being thrown at affordable housing. We would like to thank all our community partners. We couldn't do this without it. We don't get block grant money. We don't get home money. We're not an entitlement city. So we rely on our partners to help bring some of those affordable projects in. And we also have a commission that is very committed to providing affordable housing. I would like to recognize Commissioner Halliday. He was the one who brought the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to the forefront, and he did a lot of work on that. So it's great to see that we have that kind of support from the community and that's kind of support from the commission. With that, that's really all I have. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh, thanks, Sharon. It was good to hear what you've got cooking over there in Helena. So I've been kind of hopscotching today between doing this and our chamber is hosting a developers summit simultaneously. So I'm skipping out on part of that, but it was interesting to sit in the developers roundtable this morning and hear them say how important the lifting of that height restriction is. So Sharon, I commend you for that Helena has the opportunity to build up to 60 feet because these guys are saying, you know, they just can't pencil these live work facilities unless they can get an extra floor or 2. And they have found that working in municipalities that have a pretty tight height restriction has really squashed some of their projects because of that. And they also credited the city of Kalispell in developing what they call the B5 zoning district, which allows a little bit more mixed use, live work type situations. So you can have that retail commercial on the first floor, and then livable areas on the second, third, and fourth floors. So, and then also the city of Kalispell worked pretty hard to reduce their impact fees. They always held a hard line that they could never waive impact fees. And I think the city of Whitefish and probably Columbia Falls the same, that they could never waive those. But by reducing them, they have really cracked the door open for more potential people coming in to build these innovative projects that have attainable housing. We heard that a lot here this morning at the developers conference, was attainable housing. So super great, interesting information that you guys have. And I'm just so pleased to hear what's going on in these different communities and how different all of the approaches are. So I guess maybe if, do we have any questions from the floor? I kind of co-opted my position there to editorialize, but do we have any questions from the chat yet that I should check in on? I thought Kaya was gonna.
Sorry, yep, I'm here.
Okay.
So it looks like Robin Adams chimed in about similar issues in Red Lodge.
Oh,
But so no questions yet, but
okay,
a
that's
comment.
fine. So I'd like to ask a question of Emily. Is your work going to be rehab of existing homes, or will it be new construction or mix?
The mix, those are both allowed costs under the trust fund.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I do just have to say that realtors in particular have always sort of been opposed to what they would call a transfer tax or any type of thing at the closing. But I know that in several areas, they've been kicking around the idea of closing with for a cause, and where they dedicate some of their closing funds to different charitable organizations. So Laura, you might be onto something with that in your neck of the woods. And maybe, you know, I know real estate is super expensive down there and can really take advantage of some of that. So I'm getting some kind of a flash up that there's some other questions on the HUVA. Here we go.
Yeah, so I'll go take a look at those, Erica. But I see here there's a question from Ben to Laura.
Okay.
If the Big Sky Housing Trust Fund purchases land or lobbies families to donate land that it holds for later sale or RFP. And I know all of you are looking at land disposition as part of your trust fund. So might be a good topic for each of you to weigh in on. And I'll go take a look at who that.
Okay. Did you hear the question, Laura?
Yeah, at this point, the Housing Trust in Big Sky has been purchasing land, but we are certainly open to the idea to work with people for a donation and future sale kind of thing. We're exploring some concepts of even offering deed restrictions that people could place for a fee we would pay them. They would put a deed restriction on their property so that when they sold it, it could not be turned into vacation rental property, but would be used for sold to locals or rented to locals. So we're trying to explore a lot of things. One of our challenges has been because our funding is so heavily reliant on resort tax, and our resort tax likes to fund things after we already have them negotiated. But real estate doesn't really work that way. So we're trying to establish so that we actually have some capital to work with so that we can go out and negotiate on property and know that we will have it covered. So as a fairly new entity, we're just getting our legs and making sure people are seeing that we're making huge progress so that they're willing to put some capital into this fund so that we can go out and make those purchases from people.
Laura, has the Big Sky area done a housing needs assessment?
Yeah, in 2018, we did a pretty extensive housing study, which is helped us create our action strategies and actually is what helped us even create the nonprofit. Again, it was a great plan, but then there was no staff person to implement it. So we currently have an organization of 2 that is attempting to implement the plan.
Is that through county government? Is that how you're working?
Not really. It's just, we kind of just work by committee here in Sky. It's kind of a self-appointed thing. It's very unique.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys are sort of addressing, Johnny McCluskey posted a question about whether you started a separate nonprofit, Laura, to start the land trust, and then also what role local government played in establishing the land trust. So maybe a little bit of the history there is helpful for people.
Yeah, it's actually our Chamber of Commerce, which initiated the housing study. And it was funded through resort tax funds. And the housing study said, yeah, you have a huge issue and it's just getting worse because of our exponential growth. And so HRDC out of Bozeman is the one who stepped in and said, we'll be the mothership organization here to take this on and get things started. But part of the plan in that original housing study was that eventually we should become a separate nonprofit. And that just happened this past July. So we went through the whole process of getting incorporated and approved as a 501c3. And, you know, being coached by HRDC was wonderful because this was not my background. I'm an engineer that built cars all my life. And so here I am trying to figure out how to do housing. But, you know, it's just takes a lot of focus. It's not rocket science. It just takes a lot of maybe creativity, initiative, and focus.
Great.
We tease here in Missoula, we have a city councilor who actually is a rocket scientist and finds that city work is rocket science.
So Kaya, I saw one question flash up on the screen about a housing needs assessment study or a housing study. I'll just chime in because I was on the ground floor of Whitefish's and they actually did 2 studies. They hired a consultant that was specialized in mountain towns. So Whitefish fit the bill on that one. And first was the needs assessment. And then the second was kind of a strategies to address it. And again, this was run through the chamber, really picked up the ball on this one and ran with it and was super helpful in facilitating it. They approached the city council and got $60,000 for the first study. I think they had to supplement that fee a little bit. It might have actually needed an additional $20,000 to get it across the finish line. And then I think it was about the same for the strategies. And the needs assessment took about a year, and then the strategies took about a year. But as Laura pointed out, really, you gotta have that data to make a case for, you know, any type of strategy moving forward. You have to show that the need is there. And so to me, that's super critical. And I know Sharon and Emily talked about doing that too in their communities, that those numbers and that data is just essential. So I'll just, if anybody else had anything specific to that question, if they had different experiences, maybe Laura, you had the latest one done, maybe?
Yeah, and probably paid similar amounts of money for it. And I think it is very important to have the data and the assessment. But one of the other things that happens is they really bring together, here's the tools that you could possibly choose from. And here's all the things that have worked elsewhere. They may or may not fit for your community. So it was a great information sharing for us, that then we laid all those tools out on a timeline and said, okay, which should we implement now? Which should be in 3 years from now? Which should be in 5 years? And I'll tell you what, I pull that plan out regularly to make sure we're still following it, and then use that with my board to, every time we do a strategic plan review, to say, okay, are we on task? You know, what are we missing?
Yeah. Sharon, have you had similar experiences with your needs assessment there? Or?
Yeah, we did our needs, we did our first needs assessment in 2010. We did an update in 2018. If I recall, it cost somewhere between $35,000 or $40,000. We were fortunate that Rocky Mountain Development Council put most of the money up for the bill, but we also had other partners. But what I'm finding that you constantly are pulling for that when you're trying to use things like our arguments for revising our subdivision regulation, subdivision and our zoning regulations. We use that as a basis. But I would also add that also for those of you who do a lot of grant writing, it's a great resource for grant writing. It shows that your community is planning for housing. It also helped inform the city's growth policy, and some of the goals in our growth policy are based upon that housing needs assessment and some of the issues that we've had. And we've also had, since the county was part of that housing needs assessment, we are able to use that as a common ground, talking about land use regulations and other rules to make sure that we don't have as much development out in the county with regard to wells and septics, but we're trying to keep it closer into the city. So not only did it help inform us as we were trying to put together trust fund, our land use, our housing fee discussion for permitting, but it also serves a purpose for many others.
Yeah, money well spent for sure, for sure. Emily, what's Missoula done? Your housing needs assessment is probably on a much larger scale than the other two projects.
Yeah, I can't speak to the price. I wasn't here. But I can say that we started with a gaps and needs analysis called Making Missoula Home in, I think, 2018. And that really informed A Place to Call Home housing policy strategy work. And that was really our needs assessment. And that really helped inform our larger needs. And, you know, while the data has changed over the last 4, almost 5 years, the needs around housing and the prevalence of need has not changed. And so while some of the probably data needs to be updated, our goals are still the same around really like moving forward with developing and infill and all of those things that were outlined as priorities in the gaps and needs assessment, and then that informed our housing policy. So we are just moving forward with that as well. And it, to Sharon's point, it's true. It really does really center us in knowing how to like make our decisions from a really strong, informed, community-driven place, because so many people were involved in that, both of those the development of both of those plans. And so it really just helps have an investment in those decisions when we're making policy and strategies on behalf of the community, and knowing that we have those guiding documents. It really is a nice tool to have. It feels like a really important investment if communities can make it.
Good. So as a mom of a student that lives down there, how do you think that being a university town is a little bit different, flavors your housing policies than maybe Laura being in a mountain town, or Sharon being in, you know, the capital city there?
That's for me, right?
Yep, Emily. Yep.
Well, I think that it highlights that we need a broad range of housing strategies for all Missoulians, that people are at different stages of their lives, and we need to have strategies and housing options for everyone. And so our housing policy really emphasizes that. And our trust fund, you know, I mentioned sort of with a laugh that we have extensive grants and loan opportunities outlined in our ordinance. And that's really important because we need to be responsive to be able to be nimble and flexible to the strategies and innovative ideas that our partners and organizations will want to use this fund for, because we need to be able to meet a broad range of housing needs and really emphasize the diversity of housing that's needed in this community to meet students, to meet aging people, to meet families who are trying to get into the market, all of the people, you know, people who are just transitioning out of college and starting to build their housing, like all of people who deserve to live and afford housing and to also afford other things in their lives and not spend all of their money on housing. Yeah, food, really important things. And, the house really center that housing is a human right, and diversity of housing helps do that. And so our housing policy promotes that. But I think having a wide range of residents, including students, helps us center that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Erica, there's a question here for Sharon about, in Helena, how are your reductions in fee waivers and impact fee waivers for affordable housing funded by the city? How do you cover those costs?
Did you hear that, Sharon?
Yeah, I did. So first of all, we don't have impact fees in Helena. Sometimes we wish we did because that would really help with our infrastructure costs, but we have chosen not to implement impact fees. So really what we're talking about is the building fees and the plan review fees and our system development fees. How they are paid for is that we technically don't charge the fee if the commission has granted the waiver. And so those costs associated with that are covered under the different budgets whose fees we are waiving. And that sounds kind of simplistic, but that's how the commission imagined it. So that for now, that's how we're implementing. But having said that, there is, with Emily, one of the possible uses of our housing trust fund money is to pay for those fees, because you can imagine $200,000 out of anybody's budget is quite a bit of money. But the other thing, when you think about that, we are going to have $1.3 million in our housing trust fund, excuse me, which sounds like a lot, but everybody out there who's worked on a housing project know that that $1.3 million will not go too far, depending on how much assistance. So I appreciate, and I agree with Emily when you talk about you're really have to use your money with a thoughtful process, because there is so many needs against that whole broad spectrum. So that's one of the things also that the commission looks at when they decide whether or not to waive the fees. In addition to the 60%, the people have to present their project, talk about what populations they're serving. So it isn't an optional thing that the city commission has about 4 criteria that they use that they could judge whether or not they want to look at waiving those fees or doing a partial waiver.
Sharon, the county had been proposing a 10-acre minimum lot size out in the valley area there that we heard a little bit about through our realtor channels. And to me, that seemed like a big bucket of cold water on anything affordable. So did you feel that pressure from the county versus the city, or that they were kind of at odds in relation to an affordable housing program that you might have instituted within the city limits?
So let me answer the question this way. The county, having adopted that zoning, has put together what they call zoning advisory panel. So this panel is looking at that 10-acre minimum, and one of the things they are tasked for is looking at its impact on affordable housing. The other thing that the city and the county are working on is looking at doing joint standards in that area around the city, where we can extend city water and sewer. So did the 10-acre minimum provide challenges? It probably provides challenges or perceived challenges for the county, but the bigger challenge is making sure we have affordable land or land available in the city or around the area to provide for not only affordable housing, but workforce housing. So the whole idea is that we're going to look at joint standards, making sure our standards aren't creating barriers, but ensure the safe extension of water and sewer. So certainly the county zoning has put a lot more focus for the county on how they're going to provide affordable housing. And it's better demonstrated the need that the city and the county and the city of East Helena, I might add, have to work together to solve the affordable housing issues in Lewis and Clark County.
Great, great. Well, I know there was just a piece of legislation passed that, at least in the municipal areas, might have an expedited subdivision review. So that doesn't exactly help Laura out if she's doing stuff, because it's kind of municipality driven. If you have a growth policy, if you have public water and sewer facilities, things like that, that you can have a little bit speedier run through, still with public process though, through the subdivision regulation process and planning and all of that. So as you mentioned before, time is money, and to these developers, and we're hoping that that might be able to cut some of the costs on their end, and then they can pass those savings on to their clients. So we're hopeful that that's part of it. So Kaya, how are we doing for questions here?
We're doing great. I have another one, but first I was going to say, Laura, if you stop sharing your screen, and I think we'll be able to see all the presenters and anyone who is attending today. And if you want to turn your video on, if you have a comment to share on your paddle, I wrote, housing is local. Cities are creating solutions. We'd love to see what your reactions are to the panel today. And also if you want to pose a question to the panelists, and you can't do it in the chat or Huva, you can also raise your hand and we can call on you here in the session. So the next question I saw here is, I lost it, here we go. Beyond workforce housing, are all three of your communities targeting low and moderate income people? And are workers considered to be low and moderate income? So how are you drawing the lines about who you're trying to serve with these programs?
How about we send that one over to Laura to answer first?
Okay, we are focused mostly on workforce housing because in our community, that's where the need is by and large. We have all our local businesses currently impacted by the lack of workers. In fact, that was a bigger impact to us than COVID, keeping restaurants open, keeping stores open. It was the lack of ability to have workers who could find a place to live in Big Sky is what's impacted our employers. So our unemployment rate is virtually zero here. Anyone can have a job in a second if they want it. And so our supply and demand issue is all around housing workers, and that's where our efforts have focused. Now, our wage rates tend to be higher than the rest of Montana as just a way to try to incite workers to come here. And so one of our additional struggles is when we try to apply for federal funds or home funds, our typical worker here is making 80 to 90 to 100% AMI if they're employed. That just is what it takes to keep an employee here. And so again, given our unique situation, we got to focus on where our need is. It tends not to be really low income people here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sharon, do you have any additional comments? Are you looking to target any specific population?
So that's an interesting question. And let me answer it this way. I was having a discussion with a couple of the county officials, and they said, we don't want to focus on low-income housing, we want to do workforce housing. And what I said, well, let's think about this for a second. The median household income in Lewis and Clark County is like $65,000 or something like that. Well, the math anyway would show if you were a single income family, you'd have to be making at 80%, you'd have to be making $22 an hour, something like that. And when you start talking about and framing it like that, it puts that workforce housing in a whole different light. And I guess my point is, yes, the guy at McDonald's is making $15 an hour if they're lucky. And maybe there's a second household or he's got a second job. But when they start looking at what that median income is, you look at full-time, even full-time at $20 an hour, they weren't thinking of that as low income. But in essence, all of it is workforce housing. So that's kind of how our commission has chosen to look at it. When we drafted the resolution, we are trying to hit 80%, but there may be a time, and there's enough flexibility in the resolution, if looking at 100% of the median household income. One of the things I know about Missoula or Big Sky, the Lewis and Clark County has one of the highest percentages of people working 2 jobs.
Really?
And although we're the state capital, when you think about what a lot of the state employees make, they would qualify for low or moderate income on their hourly wage. So I think that in part is an education process, and I think it kind of getting them away from talking about low or moderate income gets away from what some people have as a stigma with regard to building affordable housing in their neighborhood. But teaching the community, but that includes the teacher or the early police officer, not the early, but the rookie police officer or rookie firefighter who's trying to make ends meet. So that's how we've chosen to look at it, and that's how we're going to try to aim our education process when we move forward with the housing trust fund and our other things.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. The word I hear now is that people are preferring to use is now called attainable housing. And so that seems to have a little bit broader reach there. It's 11:56. Do you want to take one more question, Kaya, or can we, what's your preference here?
Yeah, there are a couple more questions here. And actually these two are somewhat related. So let's take this as the last question, and don't be shy, folks. Show us your beautiful faces. Give us your reactions. We want to see you and interact with you today. So Billy asked, financing housing for workers in rural areas is equally very difficult, where such workers, police, teachers, etc., do not meet the AMI requirements for HUD and home and other sources. So what are alternative sources that counties and communities can access where they're unable to create a trust fund? And similarly in HUVA, a question was asked, who do you collaborate with statewide or maybe even nationally that would be available to any community in the state to use? So resources and opportunities available anywhere in the state. Erica,
Emily, do you have anything you want to chime in on that one with?
I knew you were going to ask me. Yeah, I was just thinking about this. You know, we are in a fortunate space because we are an entitlement city, and we do have resources to collaborate with CDBG and home that allow us to focus on different area median incomes, and that allows the trust fund to focus on higher area median incomes, and we're going to focus on higher area median incomes for some programs, and we're still kind of figuring some of that out. So I don't know, Billy and the other person who asked in the HUVA app, if I have a really good answer to this. I think I'm still thinking about our state and national partners for the trust fund. So I'm interested to hear what Laura and Sharon have to say. I know that there are some really great like resource partners in the local housing solutions. If you're thinking about getting started and looking at what other communities have done across the nation, that's a great place to start and look at. And I use them a lot when I'm stuck and I want to look at what other communities have done. So that might be somewhere to start. It's not necessarily a funding resource, but might be something to do. And then also Grounded Solutions Network is also, I think, a great partner to look at as well. In terms of looking for resources and learning more about if your community feels stuck or feels like a trust fund or others may not be the right solution right now, where could you go next? But I don't know that I have other resources.
Laura, do you want to chime in quick?
Yeah, real quick, in the Bozeman area, because really Big Sky is a rural area, not being incorporated. There is a local foundation that is started something called a regional housing committee that is really trying to share best practices that could really help all of the rural communities in our 3 or 4 county area. So share best practices, kind of provide some general funding support through the foundation, communications out. So that's been an initiative that's just kicked off in the last few months that I think has a lot of promise. We're following a pattern that was set in Tahoe.
Great. Well, thank you guys. That is super informative. And I want to thank Laura and Sharon and Emily for sharing their projects with us today. I mean, everything is so different, but all the same cause here. So thanks from Zoom land. And Kaya, thank you for helping us all with the technical part of it. Laura for hosting the slide deck there. And I'll just say, it was great to see everybody and have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thanks, Laura, Sharon, Emily. Remember, you can add to the community conversations on Whova. If there was anything here that you want to continue the conversation on, please do use that app and engage in that way. We're now on a 1-hour lunch break, and we look forward to having you back in breakout sessions at 1 p.m.
And where's my paddle? I would have paddled up. I should have.
Oh man, it didn't arrive yet, Erica. Shoot. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Yep. See you all.
Thank you.